So hi, everybody. I'm awesome. You can hear me now, Ben, right?
Yep.
Thanks for being on this Letter to the Editor call, everybody. We are psyched to have a good core group to generate letters to the editor across the state. Our Yes on 2 campaign is, as most of you know, a real, true grassroots effort. And the letters to the editor are going to be a key strategic part of educating our fellow citizens and generating a nice Yes on 2 buzz statewide to win this election ballot question in a really big way. So our Letter to the Editor Yes on 2 team is Ben Gubitz, who you've just heard, David Ropeek, Andrew Bloom, and myself. And if any time along the course of this campaign you have questions specifically about letters to the editor, but don't hesitate to contact us. Tonight Ben is going to start with 15-minute or so training. Andrew will jump in with some additional options for letters to the editor, and David will wrap up this training. It's meant to be interactive, so please ask questions if you have any questions. We're recording this. Ben, are you recording this?
I am recording it, yes.
Awesome, great,
yes.
Thanks. So it is recorded, and we'll send this out to all of you, so you'll be able to hear the recording of it too. And then we have a follow-up call in 2 weeks, check-in, just to see how everybody's doing. So please mark your calendars for Thursday, September 20th at 8 p.m., and maybe we'll have some back and forth emails before then too. So, all right, Ben, you want to start?
Sure, appreciate that, Nancy. And again, hello to all, and for those that have just jumped on, we're going to get started here, and welcome. This is the first Letter to the Editor training call for the Yes on 2 campaign. Again, if you're just joining, go ahead and put yourself on mute to eliminate any background noise. And also go ahead and pull out a tablet or computer, because I'm going to be asking some folks to look things up, as we'll try to be as interactive as possible. As Nancy mentioned, the goal of this call and writing letters to the editors to educate the public, not only for Yes on 2, but, the movement for a 28th Amendment and also obviously for our ballot campaign. And so the idea is here to get the word out as widely as we can through letters to the editor. This is not a campaign that can rely on those multi-million-dollar ad buys and commercials. We have to get the word out ourselves, and this really is truly a grassroots campaign, which I think is just fantastic. So as we get started here, I'm going to just throw out a question, and as people are pulling out their tablets and computers here, just go ahead and shout it out. If you can tell us something about what a letter to the editor actually is. Go ahead and unmute yourself, and if you want to just tell us, what is a letter to the editor?
It's a persuasive piece of writing.
Okay, great. A persuasive piece of writing. Thank you. And who was that?
I'm Ann from Cape Cod.
Oh, hello, Ann from Cape Cod. Welcome.
Hi, Ben.
Anyone else have anything else to add there? Okay. David Ropeek, you want to tell us a little bit more about what a letter to the editor actually is?
Letters to the editor are curiously different than op-eds, which are also a persuasive piece of writing. A letter to the editor in general, and it varies paper to paper based on size and stuff, is a short, most papers have a real limit, 200, 300, 400 words, and the paper will tell you what it is when you look it up online. A short letter in response to something that's been in the paper or in the news. It's
right.
Not a blanket out of the blue, I'm for this, you should be too. It can be that, but in general, newspapers are looking for responses to something they printed or an opinion that's been in the paper. They're thought of as responses to rather than whole cloth fresh pieces.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, David. So these letters to the editor are designed to be responses to something that has already been published in that publication. Appreciate that. Thanks, Ann, and thanks, David. So we're going to go through some steps here, and as we go to write a letter to the editor, and this will be review for some and you know, obviously new to many as well. So as we start to go over these steps you'll take to write and have a letter to the editor published, let's throw another question out there. Who on the call has actually had a letter to the editor published before? If you can, just shout out your name and what town you're calling in from if you've had a letter to the editor published before.
Anne from the Cape.
There's
Sharon.
Anne again. Okay.
Sharon from Harvard.
All right, welcome.
Anne Navon from Swampscott.
Okay, Anne's had one published.
Hey, Fred from Concord.
Fred's had one published. Hello, Fred.
Andrew
Hello?
from West Stockbridge.
All right, Andrew Bloom. That's right. Okay. So it sounds like a few folks on the phone have actually done this before, and I'm sure that they can attest that it's not too scary. But we're going to go through just a few steps right now. This will be especially helpful for the folks that have never done this before, and also a good refresher for the folks that have. So step one is, I think, really embracing the fact that, you know, the vision we share for a 28th Amendment and overturning Citizens United is really a key step to getting money out of politics, and that can be circulated widely within our community, in this case in a letter to the editor, and that you are the right person to do it. All right? The first step is believing that you can write a letter and have it published. Step two, and this is in a few minutes I'll ask you guys to do this, go online and find out what is required to submit a letter to the editor of a local paper. This could be how many words are allowed, what email address is used to submit it to the letter once it's done. What else do they require? Like your name, your address, along with maybe a phone number. Usually what you can do here is you can Google the name of your paper, maybe it's a local paper, and the phrase letters to the editor submission criteria. So to get what you need, so go ahead and for those folks that are on a tablet or a computer, Google the name of one of your local newspapers. Maybe it's the Worcester Telegram or others, and say, you know, Worcester Telegram letters to the editor submission criteria. And I'll call on a few people in a moment, but while you're looking that up, here's what I found on the Boston Globe. I Googled the Boston Globe, letters to the editor submission criteria. This is what I found. Letters should be written exclusively to the Globe and include name, address, and daytime phone number. They should be 200 words or fewer, and all are subject to editing. Send to the email that it provides or a fax number, and it also provides an address if you want to submit it in handwriting. So as other folks are looking this up, I'll give another example. This is from Pioneer Press. We value reader contributions and ask that all material be submitted exclusively to the Pioneer Press. Preference goes to letters of 150 words or fewer. All letters are subject to editing. Send to this email, this address, etc. Include your name, city of residence, your home address, daytime phone number, etc. Please call this number with any questions. So did anyone Google their paper and letters to the editor submission criteria?
One's doing it. Then I used guidelines instead of criteria.
Oh, guidelines. Okay. And what did you find?
I found the Cape Cod Times guidelines. Guidelines for guest columns, letters to the editor.
Okay, so tell us what are some of the guidelines?
Okay, so 200 words is the limit. You need your name. They don't say anything about exclusivity. But it's quite detailed, actually. I'm seeing we expect writers to be civil and straightforward. Satire is a difficult skill to master. Sarcasm rarely is a persuasive. As your mother no doubt has told you, name-calling is just plain rude. It goes on and on.
Oh, I like this one.
I love it, too. I love the case. That's fantastic. See, this is a really important part of the process and often overlooked, right? You want to see what the editors want to see, right, in order to publish something. So this is not right? So if you're thinking about, you know, writing a really cute and sarcastic letter to the editor that calls names, on the Cape, that probably is not going to go very well. It probably will not get published. So this part of the process, while it might seem really simple, is really important. Did anyone else Google letter to the editor submission guidelines or criteria for a local paper?
Well, this is Sharon from Harvard. Our local paper is a weekly paper, and they don't have very strict criteria at all. But I did look at the Worcester paper, which is remarkably simple. It's 250 words maximum and 100 words if you're making political endorsements.
Ah, okay. 250 words or 100 words for political endorsements. I would say this is probably an endorsement for Yes On too, but I guess we'd leave that up to the editor to decide. So I think folks get the idea, right? This is a really good, first step in the process. Figure out the paper that you want to submit to, and then figure out what the guidelines are. When you do this, you'll figure out who you need to send it to, the format that it needs to be in, the word limit, the style that they hope to look for, et cetera. So that's a really good way to get started.
Dan, excuse me, David, can I interject a couple additional things on these criteria?
Sure.
Some papers like mine in Concord, Mass., which is also weekly, but part of a chain. What is it, Fred? Gateway Media now? I forget who owns it. But I know the Concord Journal and that chain has a deadline. If you wanted in next week's weekly paper, and you would, if you were writing in response to something timely and in the news or other's letter to the editor, you want to be as responsive in a timely way as possible. So I advise you to look for, if the paper has it, and it depends on the paper and the size, deadlines, because that's another criteria to look for, especially if you're trying to be timely, which is a better way to get your stuff printed.
Perfect. Deadlines. Absolutely. Really good point, David. Appreciate that. Look for the deadlines as well. Okay, so we got that step down. The next step is to go online, and read a few headlines from the front page or the politics page or the editorial page, and look for articles or opinion pieces that might provide a good angle for your letter. So folks that have a tablet or a computer, go ahead and do that right now. Go online, look at your local paper. Maybe it's the front page, maybe it's the politics section, maybe it's the opinion section, and look for articles that provide for a good angle. And I'll get into what that means here in just a second, what a good angle is. And so, as I did this, I did this just earlier today. For example, I searched today on the Boston Globe and found the following article. It was, "Are you ready to bring change to Washington? Presley stuns Capuano on this historic night." That was the title of the article. And so what I did was, what we try to do in letters to the editor, we look at an article, we read it, and then we try to pivot it towards our issue, right? And so my response to that article might read something like this. To the editor, I read with great interest. Wait, hold on a second. I had this written down. Let me see here. Thought that I had it. Hold on just a quick second. I did write it down somewhere. Anyways, I can wing it. So basically what I would say was, to the editor, I read with great interest the article, "Are you ready to bring change to Washington? Presley stuns Capuano on this historic night." While Ayanna Presley's victory last night was indeed historic, and she's about to bring change to Washington, the change that we really need in Washington is to end the big money domination of our political system. That's why I'm supporting Yes On 2. Yes On 2 creates a citizen commission that will advance the policy of Massachusetts in favor of a 28th Amendment, et cetera, et cetera. I did another one. I found another one. This is from the Washington Post about gun control. And this one was just from a couple days ago. And this is, something along the lines was the Second Amendment really needed? And my response was, to the editor, I read with great interest Michael Levinson's article on September 4th. Here's the Ayanna Pressley one. I can actually read that one. To the editor, with great interest, Michael Levinson's article in September. Congresswoman-elect Ayanna Pressley will indeed bring change to Washington, and her victory was nothing short of historic. It's now our responsibility as citizens to help our elected members of Congress, like Ayanna Pressley, push for the sweeping and lasting change that is so desperately needed, above all else, getting big money out of our political system. That's why I'm voting yes on 2 this November to advance an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that will overturn Citizens United in related cases and address the undue influence of money and corporate power, et cetera, et cetera. You guys get the idea, right? I kind of read the article, and then I pivoted it to, the message that I wanted to convey, which is vote yes on 2. So let me ask, has anyone found a title that would be a good angle for a letter to the editor for yes on 2? Go ahead and shout it out. And also where you're calling in from.
Ben, I actually started a letter. This is Ann from the Cape. I started a letter last week based on all the coverage from McCain. And the reason I did that was because
really smart. It
was the McCain-Feingold was reversed by Citizens United. And
absolutely. It's really smart.
So so we'll see what happens. It was very difficult to do because I started with the Keating 5, and it was extremely difficult to cut down to 200 words.
No, but I think that's a really great example of reading an article and then pivoting it to our message.
Okay.
In the wake of the sadness of the death of an American hero, John McCain, I'm reminded of the historic reform that was passed in campaign finance called the McCain-Feingold Act. That was struck down by Citizens United. That's why we need a constitutional amendment to overturn that decision. That's why I'm voting yes on 2, et cetera. Exactly. One that I mentioned that was about gun control and the Second Amendment, I just found, to the editor, I read with great interest Mark Hopkins' piece, Why Did the U.S. Constitution Need the Second Amendment? Indeed, the argument for a Second Amendment in the 1780s America seems far more valid than its application in present time. I would submit that a 28th Amendment to the Constitution is now paramount to implementing the necessary firearm reform needed and supported by the majority of Americans. That's why I'm voting yes on 2 in November, et cetera, et cetera. Did anyone else?
Would everybody remember to mute, please?
Yeah, go ahead and mute your phone if you're not talking. Did anyone else find an interesting article of a local paper that they might be able to use as a pivot point for their letter to the editor? No problem if people are feeling a little bit shy. And obviously my examples aren't perfect examples, but they should give you an idea of how you can take an article and use it to share some aspect of our vision. So if you did find a headline that you want to suggest that might be a good angle for a letter to the editor, go ahead and shout it out. I'll give folks one more second if they want to shout something out.
Well, I've looked at the Worcester Telegram Gazette, and there's nothing that jumps out of their headlines today. But maybe on another day there would be.
So,
Ben, excuse me, David butting
unfortunately, I was just going to say, unfortunately, money in politics impacts just about every aspect of our society, right? And so there is always something or somewhere, some angle to be found within the Worcester Telegram or whatever. So just throw it out there. What is one headline that you might have seen while you were just Googling that? Any headline that you found in the Worcester Telegram.
How about something on the Affordable Care Act is under fire again?
Oh, man. That's a perfect one. To the editor, I read with great interest the article on the Affordable Care Act, while it's well known, the health insurance industry is one of the largest, campaign contributors in America, including the pharmaceutical company and insurance companies. The big, money, domination of the healthcare industry into our political process is polluting the blah, 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 blah. That's why I'm voting yes on 2 in a constitutional amendment. Does that make sense, right? So, like, something like the Affordable Care Act, healthcare, is always big money being spent to influence the outcome of elections from insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, and that provides a perfect pivot point to why we actually need the 28th Amendment and why we're voting yes on 2. So you can really extrapolate quite a bit from virtually any article that you find in a paper, which is advantageous for us for our issue, not so much for our society, of course. David, what did you want to add there?
I just wanted to add that in addition to searching headlines, which we are in this exercise, you should also search their editorial pages for op-eds or letters, because a reply to those is really classically one of the things the editors will value for the discussion on the editorial pages. So in addition to Ben's good advice about trying to link anything in the news that's relevant to be a peg or a hook, as we call it in the news business, you should also search on their editorial pages for any kind of commentary that similarly can be used as a peg or a hook, because that ups your chances of getting published.
Fantastic advice. Absolutely, David. Yeah, that's really good. So I would say, as a next step, go ahead, step number 4, go online and read some letters to the editor in the paper that you're writing to understand how readers begin them and kind of the general tone, right? Get a sense for how other folks are actually getting published. How are all these people doing that? What is the tone? How are they addressing the readership? Are they addressing the editor, et cetera? So go ahead, in the letters to the editor section and read some and get a feel for the tone. The next step is to use the format that they requested and then sit down and actually write your letter to the editor. Now, after this call, we'll be sending around, a messaging, guide to help with your letters to the editor. And you can use this messaging guide as you sit down and you find something that you want to respond to in your paper that will help with some of the talking points as you start to think about what you want to put in there. Now, use the format, write your letter, and then David's going to talk to us a little bit more about what to do after you have written the letter. But before we get there, just know if after, you submit your letter, if they reject it, try a smaller, maybe more local paper. You might have to find a different article, or you may be able to write a smaller paper without referring to an article, et cetera. So, there's a lot of different things that you can do, so don't get discouraged. And if your letter is published, this is the most important part. This is the most important step. If your letter is published, celebrate, do a little dance, and then share it with everybody. Share it with your Yes on 2 captains and volunteers. Share it on social media. Share it with me. Share it with your elected officials, whether it's your state legislators or your member of Congress. And if it isn't published, that's okay. Celebrate that you took an action, and eventually you'll have a letter to the editor published, but only if you take the action. So those are the steps. I will go ahead and, along with the messaging guide, I will send out these steps that we kind of went through very briefly this evening, along with the recording of tonight's call, so you can refresh your memory on that. And then we can open it up to any questions that you might have, and then we'll bring in Andrew Bloom that's going to talk about some options as well in terms of, getting these letters written and published. So does anyone have any questions that come to mind right off the bat?
Ben, I have a quick question. This is Ann from the Cape again. Would you like me to send you this link for the guidelines from the Cape Cod Times, because it's quite extensive and it's really helpful. So
sure.
Yeah, send me the link. You could share it possibly.
That'd be great.
And
Send it along.
this is
Love
David
it.
again.
Love it.
Don't
For
forget,
example.
you guys, we're all learning this, but there's this communications committee that's kind of helping Ben because Ben is running the whole campaign. So if you want to, Ann, on letters to the editor sort of stuff specifically, you can send them either to me or Nancy or Andrew. Nancy and Andrew are kind of the unofficial heads of the letters to the editor and op-ed subcommittee, and I as the chair of the committee, and we might be able to use it also Waboy at the main campaign, include her. If you don't have those addresses, we can get them to you.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. Appreciate you saying that, David. And obviously, big hats off to everyone on this call, and special thanks to David and Nancy and Andrew and other folks that have really taken on a leadership role for the communications committee that's really going to help drive the message to win big in November. So special thanks to those folks. If there aren't any more questions, I'll go ahead and kick it on over to Andrew Bloom, our friend out in Western Mass, to talk about a few of the options to consider as we're thinking about writing these letters to the editor, and then we'll kick it on over to David to sign off. I actually will have to sign off in just a few minutes, but I'll make sure to say goodnight before I do. So, Andrew, I'll go ahead and kick it on over to you.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Hi, everybody. Obviously, the goal here is to create exposure for this mission, give it as much visibility as possible. So we really just want to encourage people to do this and not worry about it being perfect per se. Done is certainly better than perfect. In terms of a couple of options, the main thing, we want everybody to feel comfortable doing this. So if there's any holdback, hesitation, sticking points for you, reach out to Nancy or I or David, and hopefully we can help you through that. So a couple of things that came to mind. We talked about a couple of different options in terms of writing a letter to the editor. So number one, you write a piece. You get your criteria. Okay, I got to be within 200 words. I got to be within 250 words. You write it yourself. You have the criteria for it. Ben and David and Nancy and I were speaking earlier about setting up a mechanism where it would be helpful if you wanted to run this by us as a committee to give it a general eyeballing, not to pick it apart, but just to make sure messaging is on track. We want to keep the message consistent. If there's any general feedback that we can help provide, we will. But again, importantly is to do it. So writing a piece like that from scratch is great. As Ben mentioned, another great thing to do, which I think is actually very simple, is to write a response. When you see something related to this, I guess the way mostly Ben was just focusing on is responding to something else, something related to the affordable health care or something else. And so in addition to that, certainly if any pieces come out related to this specifically on this topic, whether favorable or unfavorable, respond to it. I saw David Ropiak's letter on September 9th, and I really agree with his point that that this is important for this reason, and I really hope that everybody will vote yes on 2 on November 6th. It can be as simple as that. It can be a few lines. There will be longer pieces. There will be shorter pieces. But to get things peppering all over the place is really what we're after. And one additional option potentially is if you feel like, gosh, this is something I like the idea of, but I don't know if I'm really going to do it. I don't know if I have the time or the inclination. There are those of us that would be happy to pen a piece for you. We could write a piece, and then you can either submit it as is. You can edit it. You can change some words to make it your own and sound like you. But we can offer a ghost writing service, if you will, on something like that. And that's about all I had in mind at the moment. I guess with that, I'll take any questions anybody has, and then I'll turn it over to David for additional comments.
This is Sharon from Harvard, and while you were chatting, I pulled up an editorial in the Worcester Telegram Gazette that probably something similar appeared in many other papers. Then it says, it came out on Monday. It was how your vote can make a big difference tomorrow. So it was urging people to get to the polls.
Uh-huh.
So my question is the connection between the worth of your vote and voting yes on the ballot question a link that can be made, that your vote is more powerful if money is out of politics? Or is that too obtuse?
No, I think that the short answer is absolutely you can make the connection, and I'm gonna refer to a point that David made to me the other day, which I think is critical in all of our communications. What's really important here is people, generally speaking, feel a lack of control over everything that's happened. It's snowballed out of control, and corporations are taking over our political and legal processes, and we feel unempowered. So it's a great thing to talk about. Hey, here's something. This is a fantastic thing, this yes on two question, because money in politics is a central problem, and here's an opportunity to do something about it and begin taking back control. I think I agree with David. I think that point really resonates with people.
Sharon, I would back up Andrew's first response, which is absolutely, if you can find a link, be smart about how you turn it around into an argument for yes on two. But I also want to support your sense that you want the link to be as strong and obvious as you can make it. That increases your chances of getting published. So if your sense is that you're straining too hard to link from what you saw to what you're trying to say, listen to that instinct and do your best to try to find links that aren't going to strain the editor's credulity as he or she is deciding whether to run it. The stronger the link, the better.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions about anything I said before let David add something to that?
Andrew, this is Fred. I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You talked earlier about using the messaging guide, and I was just wondering if you guys were going to send us some sample letters as well.
Yes, Ben, are you still on the line?
I am indeed. Yes, we'll be sure to send around a few sample letters that have been published.
Great.
I have another question. I think that there are limits to the number of letters that some newspapers will accept from you within a certain time limit.
Yes.
So that, for instance, I think in the Cape Cod Times they won't print anything by the same author within 1 month.
That's generally the case. That's true of my paper out here. And
okay.
I don't know if that's published in all of the guidelines that they print. But
right, I didn't even see it on the guideline page, but I had heard that somewhere else. I read it somewhere else.
That's yes, and that's interesting that it doesn't necessarily show up in the guidelines. I think it does in the Berkshire Eagle out here, but that's a very good point. So you
I was thinking that we want to get something out there right away. So if you're going to be writing and you want to write more than one thing, you might want to start right away because you're going to have to wait before you do the next one.
That's a great point.
Or, Anne, you have a bunch of buddies ready to do it, so you've already been in the paper, you let them do it.
Right. That's excellent, yeah. I like that, yeah.
Yeah, you could also, Anne, help your buddies. I hear you can write a letter and offer it up to them to submit to the same paper. And then there starts to be a lot more coming into one paper. And the editors, I think, will pay a lot more attention maybe to that, too.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Any other general questions?
Yeah, great question there.
This is Denise from Worcester. I do have a question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Renee and I had been talking about maybe a group of us from our team writing a letter to the editor. Would that be suggested, or would it be better if we did them individually? as opposed to signing a letter from, say, 4 people?
My suggestion, David again, my suggestion would be, Denise, what's your last name? Denise, what your last name is, on behalf of Citizens for Yes on 2.
Oh,
or
okay.
something like that.
Okay.
Generally, most papers want a single person who is named to be responsible for the opinion. You could add all the names. Those are all words that come off your credit account, right? It's wonderful if you can say you're writing on behalf of a whole bunch of people who believe this too. Anybody at any medium-sized paper or up who is paying attention to these, and when you get up to the Globe size, I mean, I've had letters to the editor in the Globe, and I've gone back and forth for a week editing these 200 words. I mean, like, these editors have to prove they exist by changing where the commas are sometimes, it feels like. But they'll ask, who's this group? So you can consider having a bunch of people sign on, but don't forget, A, that it's a bunch of words that come off your credit, and some papers may ask you just to pare down to the single one.
Okay.
And obviously 4 letters could be better than 1 if 4 people are inspired to write separate letters.
That's what I was wondering.
But it is, this is Anne, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. I think that sitting with a group is such a great idea because I think that when you're speaking out loud, I was a former teacher, and I know that research tells us that it's better to speak your ideas before you write them, and it's also better to be speaking your ideas with a group because as you're speaking, your ideas are growing. So the idea of working with a group to write letters, I think, is excellent.
Yeah, whatever
There's
works.
another small little tip from somebody who's been a writer all his life. After you've written it, read it out loud to make sure it flows to your ear as well as your mind. Listen to it.
Yeah.
Because that means the person reading it is going to feel that same flow, and that makes the brain happier to read it, basically.
It's a great idea, too. I love that idea, Denise, of doing it in a group because it's way more fun also.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, again, thanks to all. Seriously, this is the most important thing that we can do on the campaign to help get the word out to as many folks as possible. So get that letter written, or get that letter wrote. Sorry, get it sent over to go ahead and send it over to the communications committee team, and let us know if you have any questions. And David, I'll let you close us out here.
Yeah, very briefly. I just wanted to stress that different papers have different levels of rules and criteria, so that's one point to just bear in mind. Second one is that you will be getting and this reiterates what was earlier said, what we're calling a messaging memo, summarizing what a group of us think might be the central points that would be the most persuasive, and also urging you to think carefully about tiptoeing around or avoiding highly polarized sorts of issues that are more partisan trigger language for people's identities that kind of gets their backs up and makes them defensive about the rest of your message. We want this to be a victory that's more than just 51%, and for that, we're really going to have to target and appeal to voters that may not already be on this wavelength and may be more politically conservative or Republican or Trump supporters or whatever. Partly the communications committee is going to work on identifying the areas of the state in which letters to the editor could reach that particular kind of audience, and the Cape probably is one of them. But it's part of the messaging memo will point out to you to think carefully about not trying to avoid tripping off trigger language. And the last thing I'll reiterate is, and it's also in the messaging memo you'll be getting, we do encourage you, not require, of course, but encourage you to send whatever you're going to send in to a few of us first, Nancy or Andrew as the co-chairs of the Letters to the Editor Committee, or me, not to approve it, not to say yes or no, not to edit it, but for consistency and clarity. That probably is going to help all of us. I know in my writing career, almost everything I wrote got better when somebody else read it before I put it out there. So I just want you to bear that in mind. And if while you're writing these you have any questions, email any of the three of us. Our contact information will be on the messaging memo, and we can help because that's what we signed up to do and want to do.
Can
That's
I
all
just
for
add
me.
something too?
Yeah.
I'm going to put notes out for this, and I'm going to put everybody's email on it so that we're all connected in this group. So if you don't want your email to be seen by everybody else, then please just contact me. This is Nancy Hesselton@gmail.com.
Hi,
And then
it's
any
Ann.
questions?
Ann Navon
Yep.
has a question. Hello?
Go ahead, Ann.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, go ahead.
I've been out of the loop for a while. I was thinking of writing a letter. I was also had a couple of ideas to reach out to my local representatives, one of which I know pretty well, and see if maybe they could come out for yes on to. But I don't have, at least if not handy, the actual language that's going to appear in front of them. And I'm wondering if I could get that also on the memo or whatever you're going to send around.
The messaging memo will have, yes, you will have that.
All right.
The messaging memo will have, but let me tell you what you'll have there.
Okay.
You'll have the summary that the Secretary of State has posted on the official state's website.
And is that what's going to appear in front of these people's eyes, in front of the voters'
eyes? No,
eyes?
they'll probably see something simpler than that. Ben, check me on this if you're still here. Maybe the first paragraph of it. Something very similar, very similar.
So we don't have the exact language yet?
I'm not sure that it exists. I don't know. Dave here, and I'm just too stupid to know. Anybody else know?
No, I'm just wondering if that wouldn't be helpful to be able to have in front of me when I write a letter to the editor the exact language that's going to appear in front of the voters.
You could use you could use that language in your letter, or I think you'll be safe using language that comes pretty close to it if you refer to what the summary is on the Secretary of State's page, which website we are sending with the memo.
Okay.
I was gonna say, and I can send that around exactly what the voters will see when they hit the when they hit the ballot box in November, on November 6th. However,
I think that would be helpful. Is it still?
Yeah, I can do that. It's less. It's that language is less persuasive, right? It's meant to be less persuasive. It's very matter of fact, and we have
dry and objective. It comes from the League of Women Voters, or no? Who writes the ballot one? The state, I think, right?
No, it comes from the Secretary of State and the Attorney General.
Secretary of State, right?
So
so his summary on his webpage is Bill Galvin. He got reelected. It will give you a very close approximation of that language.
Yeah, and I can also send it around, but I just wanted to mention, we do have the opportunity to be a bit more persuasive than what would be in that language, but I can send it around as a reference point as well.
This is
Thank
Andrew.
You.
One last thing. So I reiterated before, we want to make this process simple and have people motivated to do this. Any suggestions you have to make the process better, and if there's things that Nancy and I can do as committee members working on this to help you with the process, please let us know.
Awesome. Any more
Excellent.
questions anybody has? That was fantastic, you guys. Great. We are off. Thank you, Ben. Thank you,
off
David.
And running.
Thank you, Andrew. Yep.
Made
Thank you,
it.
everybody who's on this. And we'll be sending notes out to everybody who is on this, and you'll get a recording, and we'll go from there. Let's keep in touch.
Okay.
And also,
Thanks,
again,
all.
mark your calendars for the date again. in 2 weeks, Thursday night, the 20th at 8 o'clock. So hopefully I'll be all on that call.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Thanks folks,
so
for what you're
much.
doing.
Thank you.
Good night. Good luck.
Good night.
Bye-bye.